My name is Todd Bakal from the National Jewish Committee on Scouting. I am interviewing today Bruce Chudacoff, a former chairman of the committee, hailing originally from Bay Lakes Council in the Midwest. Bruce, can you please tell us about your early years, where you were born, and how you grew up in scouting?
Sure. I grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin, and that was at the time the Valley Council. It's now part of the Bay Lakes Council. I was in Cub Scouting and I went through the entire program. I eventually got my Arrow of Light. At one time, my mother was the den mother. I'm sure just about everybody had that experience. And after Cub Scouting, I went into Boy Scouts. We in Appleton had a very small Jewish community, so I was one of the only people who was in scouting that was Jewish. I had one friend who was in my troop, which was Troop 8, and I was in that troop until I graduated from high school. I became an Eagle Scout in 1959 and served in a number of positions in my patrol and in my troop. Eventually was a junior assistant scoutmaster. And I remember a number of years we would go to camp at my favorite camp, Gardner Dam Camp. It's located in northern Wisconsin. One of the things I remember specifically is the time we captured a porcupine. It was a little dangerous because it got upset with us and had its porcupine needles sticking out, but we kept it as a pet for a few weeks until the smell got to be too bad and we finally had to let it go. I also remember starting up a new camp. I was at Boulder Lake where I got pioneering merit badge and our group was the first one to camp there. So that was my early experience with scouting and I left Appleton, went to the University of Michigan, and after I graduated from there, I went to Harvard Law School, and then I spent 2 years in the Army and came back from Vietnam to Appleton, where I started practicing law. So that's when I started my adult experience with scouting.
How did you get involved in scouting again after your Army service?
In 1979, the Bay Lakes Council was selling one of its camps or part of a camp. It was part of my camp, Gardner Dam, and they were selling a part on the Wolf River to the Wisconsin DNR, but for some reason they couldn't close it. So the president of one of our local banks, who happened to be also the president of our council, came to me and he said, "You've got to get this deal closed." So I said, okay, and talked to the DNR. Eventually, we closed the deal and we sold the property right along the river to the DNR, but we kept the right to use it. So for over 50 years now, we've still been using it as if it were ours, but it belongs to the DNR. So that was how I got back into scouting as an adult. And they said to me, well, if you close this deal, we'll put you on our executive committee. And the next year, they made me the chairman of the administration part of the council. So I became a vice president immediately and was on the executive committee as well as the board. We had an encampment that I remember well at Road America that year. And one of our invited guests was Greenbar Bill. So we got to meet him and have dinner with him. And I remember we met him on a very cold day out at the camp. And my wife said to him, "How can you be walking around in shorts in this cold weather?" And he said, "Danish blood." So there was the time that I got to know Greenbar Bill and how he was relating to scouting. After that, I became operations vice president in the council. And with a friend of mine who was the council commissioner, we basically ran the council for a couple of years. And that brought me to my shovel story. When I was vice president of operations, I had to get a dining room built and it was for our Cub Scout camp. So the council president talked to me about it, and the scout executive found a guy who he thought maybe would do some of the work for us. So we went to meet him, and on the way, I stopped at a hardware store and I bought a shovel. And we went to his office, and he said to me, "How come you've got a shovel with you?" And I said to him, "Well, I'm giving you this shovel, and I want you to build me a dining hall at Camp Rocolio." And I said, "I want you to start by figuring out the plans, and then I want you to raise the money, and then I want you to build it. And when it's done, I'm going to take the shovel back and we'll put it on the wall of the new dining hall." He said to me, "Well, I think we could use the shovel to shovel something out of my office that you're bringing in with you." But he agreed to do it. He got the dining hall built. We put the shovel there, and it was probably on the wall for about 30 years before people expanded the dining hall. So we did that. We also were involved with the first food good turn, and I was the logistics chairman for that for Bay Lakes Council, which was all of northeastern Wisconsin from the Milwaukee suburbs up to the border. And that was an interesting experience trying to put that together for everybody. I did that. I was in charge of our family FOS program for a year or two, and I instituted reporting sessions for all of our council district so that everybody would have a chance to explain why they hadn't met their goals, or if they had, they would tell us that, and we would be able to give them some praise for that. And I brought one or two special guests to our meetings so that they would be interested in coming. After that, I became the council. And I was legal counsel for most of 35 years until I retired from law practice. That was my experience in Bay Lakes Council.
When did you get involved with the National Jewish Committee on Scouting?
I became involved with the National Jewish Committee in the 1980s. And initially, I did some things to survey the country and find out what we could do to bring Jewish scouting to kids throughout the country. I was insistent that we have not only programs that help to serve our local councils that had Jewish units, but also what I call the lone Jewish scout. Those kids who, like me, were the only Jew in a council or the only Jew in a patrol or a den, so that they would be able to participate in Jewish flavored scouting. And I encouraged things like that. I was at one point an instructor in the Jewish scouting program at Philmont and did that a couple of times in my career. After I'd been working for some time as a member of the committee, they came to me and said, "We want you to be chairman."
Can you tell us about your service as the National Jewish Committee on Scouting chairman?
When I started out, I decided that we needed to have accountability. I was the head now of a volunteer organization, and I wanted it to be more relevant, more visible, and more productive. So, as I had done in earlier things in Bay Lakes Council, decided that we would have regular meetings of our various committee chairs, and I would talk with them individually, make sure that they had goals and that they were actually following through on them. And we followed that for quite a while, and I tried to change the culture of the program so that we could see how we were doing nationally and try to get on a track that was serving more Jewish scouts. I authored some pamphlets to help do that. One of them was how to form a Jewish committee on scouting at a local level. Another one was how to form a Jewish scout unit. In the BSA, there were lots and lots of documents and pamphlets saying, do this and do that, but there was nothing that actually said, here are the nuts and bolts about how you form a unit. So I created that, and we made a PowerPoint for it, and I would go around the country and talk to people in places like Austin and San Antonio and in Wisconsin and in Cleveland and other places and encourage them to get involved with Jewish scouting. We set up goals for the number of scout units that we could have based on Jewish population throughout the country, and it did more things. We created some pamphlets for parents to tell them about scouting for Jewish youth. We tried to set up some guidelines for how to help keep a unit healthy and all of those things. I also, at one point, chaired the Jewish booth at the National Jamboree. And when they moved the Jamboree to the summit, I went out there to make sure that they would have adequate program that would support Jewish scouting, including setting up an eruv so that those observant scouts that needed one would have it, and to make sure that we had kosher food. And we set up programs for Jewish scouts so they'd have something to do on Sunday when all of their Christian brethren were at their services. And we did a number of things like that in order to make sure that everybody would have a complete experience at the jamborees. I also worked on the World Jamboree a couple of times to ensure that there was enough money there to support a Jewish program. And we did that several times. When the World Jamboree was here in the United States, I went to that one and supported the Jewish program and also ran an escape room with co-chairman. So we brought kids from all over the world into our escape room, and they had to work together to try to figure out how to get out of it. It was an interesting experience because we discovered that scouts in Europe had never used a combination lock, and we had to give them instructions on how that would work. Then I had some other experiences on the national level, not just in the National Council, but also in other areas. I became a member of the Literature Subcommittee of the National Religious Relationships Committee to make sure that the publications of the BSA took into account a Jewish perspective as well as others, and that they were basically religion neutral. I brought as best I could Jewish scouting to the fore so that everybody would take us into account when they did things. And to help do that, and also to help other religions, I created the BSA's calendar of religious observances. And we've had that for about 10 years now. It is set up to be at least 2 years in advance. And what it does is it tells people all of the holidays of the major religions, what they're about, and which ones they should not be scheduling scouting activities on, so that we help units and up to the National Council to follow through with the national religious principle, which is to observe neutrality in religion and also respect all religions.
Impressive. Can you tell us about your work on the establishment of NJCOS as a corporation independent from BSA?
A couple of years ago, the BSA had its own reorganization. And when it did that, we were a committee of the BSA. We were the only religion that still was a committee, and it became obvious we couldn't do that anymore. So I used my legal background and established a nonprofit corporation called the National Jewish Committee on Scouting, had it qualified as a 501c3 tax-free organization, and got that started. Also negotiated a memorandum of understanding with the BSA, which solidified our ability to be the Jewish voice in scouting. And that became a template for the other religious organizations that scouting represents. So I got that going, and that is now the way that the NJCOS operates.
What have you been doing lately in scouting?
Well, I've been maintaining a role nationally, and back when scouting did not admit gays, I lobbied for several years to try to bring us to a point where we did not discriminate based upon sexual orientation. Spoke about it to national leaders and also at the national meetings when gays were permitted. I spoke out and helped try to guide us in that direction. Once we did that, we were faced with the reform movement, which did not permit its congregations to participate in scouting because of our former ban on gays. So I went to the RAC, which is a policy arm of the reform movement, and explained to them why they should admit scouting. They were just about convinced that I was right until somebody said, "Well, what about transgenders?" So I said, "Well, of course, scouting admits transgenders." We hadn't said that yet, but I told them, "Sure, we do that." So we went ahead and they agreed to start using scouting. I done a number of things and going way back in history when the issues came about how there were some scout masters and other adult leaders who were molesting scouts. I heard about it while I was our council at Bay Lakes Council, and I immediately instituted a two-leader policy so that there was never going to be an opportunity for an adult to be alone with a scout. And I think about 6 months later, that became our national policy and the basis for how we are the safest program in the world for young kids. More recently, there was a time that I visited my son's pack back in Appleton, and I brought along some pipe cleaners for a project that I'd done as a Cub Scout. They had no idea what a pipe cleaner was. So to make pipe cleaner people was really a novelty to them. Also, currently, I'm a member of the National Religious Relationships Committee. I'm still on the Literature Subcommittee. I'm still doing the calendar of religious observances. It's in 2028 right now. So if you look at that, you'll be able to see what's going on there. Internationally, I helped to reorganize the International Forum of Jewish Scouts. And when we did that, I developed its awards program. One of the program's highlights was the creation of the Nachshon Fellowship. Nachshon is supposedly the person who led the Israelites by jumping into the waters of the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, as they were receding, and led the way across on dry land. So Nachshon Fellows are people internationally who have done things for scouting. And I became one of the first of about a dozen Nachshon fellows throughout the world. I've held meetings on international scouting in Tel Aviv with the Israel Scouts and in France and with people in the UK and encouraged the development of those things. I'm currently on the advisory boards at the Northeast Illinois Council and Bay Lakes Council and have had some work in doing some merger talks in various councils. I led a merger which brought the Hiawatha Land Council of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan into the Bay Lakes Council and done some other things like that. I also became a distinguished Eagle Scout in 2001, and I think I've been told that's about 1 in 1,000 Eagle Scouts who are distinguished Eagles. I'm not quite sure how I fit into that, but that's one of those honors that I am particularly pleased with. I've been involved in creating some community seders in Northeast Illinois Council and a walk of faith and try to keep involved in things as much as I can. So that's where
Wow.
I'm at right now.
Please tell us about your association with the Green Bay Packers.
I am a lifelong Packer fan. We are owners. There, I think, are only about 500,000 of us in the world. I did at one point, as an owner, happened to visit the stadium in Dallas when Jerry Jones was there, and I told the person who was guiding us through the stadium, well, I'm an owner. I want to see Jerry. Have him come down. Didn't happen. They almost threw me out because I was wearing my Packer clothes at the time. We still have season tickets. We live in Glenview, Illinois right now, but we go to all the games. We have tailgates there, and we fly our Packer flag in Illinois when we're there. We fly it here in Florida when we're down here. And we put up with a lot of grief sometimes about that. Like the time I took a Go Pack Go banner and carried it around the stadium in Detroit when the Packers were playing. We almost didn't get out of there alive, but we've had seats at the stadium since my father picked them out when they built the stadium, and we've gone to every game since the Ice Bowl back in 1967.
Please tell us about your association with the University of Michigan.
I'm a proud graduate of Michigan. I graduated in 66. Two of our three kids went to Michigan. They both married Michigan grads. We still have season football tickets there and go to at least a couple of games. I'm told that for the games we don't go to, my daughter, who lives in Ann Arbor, uses the proceeds from selling the tickets for our granddaughter's education funds. I don't know, I've never seen an accounting of that, but I'll take their word for it. And we just love participating in Michigan things. Just got back from a Michigan trip to Tahiti, and in a week we're going to a Sarasota Alumni Club meeting just before an opera that we're taking to our granddaughter with. So we continue to do things with Michigan.
Go Blue, and thank you so much for your time and for your many years of service on the National Jewish Committee on Scouting. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.